A single word could unravel reality itself. Elara unrolls a brittle, glowing scroll within the ruins of Imzulft, her heart pounding as she recognizes the script of a Daedric pact. Her goal is to decode its binding magic before a latent curse claims her mentor. One wrong interpretation, and she could unleash catastrophic consequences or draw the gaze of powerful, otherworldly entities. By the end of this, you will understand how to decipher the most dangerous magical contracts and navigate their real-world consequences. What happens when ancient words hold the power to bind souls and rewrite fate? Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? How far would you go to protect someone you love from a curse you cannot see? The silver stylus glides over the first glyph, and the air itself solidifies around her. A dome of shimmering energy seals the study, and above her desk, a spectral map of the Oblivion realms flickers into existence, its shifting planes a beautiful and terrifying sight. But this activation is a beacon in the unseen world. From the shadowed arches of the city, a silent watcher turns its gaze toward her light, a guardian attuned to any disturbance in the flow of forbidden knowledge. Elara feels the weight of this attention, a cold prickle on her neck, as her eyes truly comprehend the text before her. This is no simple agreement. The clauses are not just written, they are woven with personal Jesus, magical compulsions that bind the reader's very soul to the terms the moment they are understood. To read it is to agree to it. Her breath catches. She is at a crossroads, trapped between the desperate need to save her mentor and the horrifying realization that every second she spends decoding this contract pulls the metaphysical chains tighter. Should she continue this solitary, perilous path, or risk a journey to find a reclusive expert, potentially leading every hunter of arcane secrets directly to her door? The stakes are no longer theoretical. A faint, whispering echo now threads through the silence of her sealed room, a soft, insistent voice just at the edge of hearing. It is the contract itself, and it is aware of her. That haunting whisper sparks a memory, a desperate clawing at the edges of her fear. It reminds her of an obscure text, a footnote in a crumbling journal speaking of a Lexicon of Loopholes, a heretical guide said to be hidden deep within the restricted archives of the arcane university. The memory of that forgotten journal was her only map. Elara stood before the grand, sealed gates of the arcane university's archives, the air humming with layers of protective magic. A direct approach was impossible. Instead, she wove a subtle illusion, not of invisibility, but of bureaucratic belonging. She projected an aura of a senior librarian, returning from a late-night study, her steps echoing with a false authority that the wards recognized and accepted. The great doors swung open without a sound, admitting her into the silent, cavernous labyrinth of knowledge. Towering shelves stretched into darkness, each grimoire and scroll pulsing with restrained power. Her search was a frantic, whispered thing, fingers tracing spines until she found it. Tucked away in a forgotten corner, the Lexicon of Loopholes. It was a simple, unadorned book, but it radiated a cold, demanding energy. As her hand touched the cover, a spectral script flared to life in the air before her. To open it, to learn its secrets, required a toll, a sacrifice of a recent memory. The choice was agonizing. Would she surrender the frustrating afternoon she finally mastered a complex warding glyph, a lesson in perseverance from her mentor or the pure, untainted joy of her first successful spell, a simple light that had danced in her palm. That joy felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. With a resolve that hollowed her chest, she offered up the memory of that light. The sensation was not painful, but profoundly empty, as if a small, warm color had been bleached from the world. The lexicon fell open. Its pages revealed the terrifying truth. The contract she had found was a soul weaver's accord, a maliciously clever pact that preyed upon the reader's own good intentions. Its clauses were designed to be interpreted with hope, to seem like a path to salvation, while secretly twisting that very hope into a snare for the soul. The words she had read were not just binding, they were a metaphysical trap that grew stronger with every attempt to circumvent it. Her solitary decoding in the study was only tightening its grip. The lexicon was clear. To break such a weave, one must understand its origin, the place where its words first touched the world. She had to find the original summoning site, to see the contract not just as text, but as an event rooted in a specific time and stone. The answer would not be in a book, but in the earth itself. The ashen wastes of Morrowind offered no comfort, only a landscape of brittle silence and scorched rock. Elara found the summoning circle exactly where the lexicon had foretold, its obsidian stones standing like broken teeth against a sky the color of old bruises. Kneeling in the gray dust, she traced the primary Daedric inscription with a gloved hand, the glyphs cold even through the leather. Using the lexicon's chillingly direct translations, she began to piece together the ritual's true purpose, not as a pact for power, but as a plea for escape. The moment she vocalized the first translated phrase, the dead air stirred. The very ashes at her feet began to swirl, rising into the forms of two spectral figures locked in a bitter negotiation. One was a desperate mortal mage, the other a shimmering, indistinct projection of a Daedric entity. Their silent play was a reenactment of the Pact's original signing, a ghostly echo of that fateful moment. But as Elara watched, the spectral mage turned its hollow gaze directly to her. Its gestures changed, its hands forming new, deceptive symbols in the air, while its mouth silently mouthed clauses that promised easy loopholes and painless exits. These were lies, false paths woven from the very ash to test her understanding. The pressure to believe them was immense, a siren song for a weary mind. Her hand flew to the truth, detecting Amulet at her throat, the one her mentor had given her so long ago. Its gentle, warm hum was a familiar comfort, a tether to reality. As she focused on its steady pulse, the spectral mage's deceptions flickered, their forms becoming transparent and fractured. She could see the true, brutal clauses hiding beneath the ash-born illusions. But with each lie she saw through, the amulet grew hotter. A sharp crack echoed in the silence, a hairline fracture splitting its polished surface. The warmth began to fade, replaced by a chilling dread. The amulet was failing, and its protective clarity would soon be gone. In that moment of strained connection, the final, terrible truth of the contract washed over her. The original mage had not fulfilled his side of the bargain. He had found a way to delay his payment, to defer his soul's binding, and in doing so, he had left the Pact's metaphysical weight hanging in the balance, a hungry void searching for a new soul to claim. Her mentor was not the target of a random curse. He was the most convenient substitute, a powerful soul offered up by the unresolved terms. The amulet gave another sickening crunch, its light guttering like a dying star. She had the truth, but she was about to lose the only tool that could help her verify it again. To go forward, she would need something stronger, something forged not just for detecting lies, but for surviving them. The amulet's final fracture left a void of certainty in its wake. Elara knew her next step demanded an artifact of far greater power, something that could pierce through deception without shattering under the strain. Her search led her to the fungal towers of Sadrith Mora, a city where the reclusive Telvanni wizards practiced magic as twisted and opportunistic as the mushrooms they built upon. High in a spire that pulsed with a faint, sickly light, she found the wizard Malin, a Mer with eyes like polished stones and a reputation for trades that always favored himself. He possessed the glass eye of truth, a milky orb that could, he claimed, reveal the hidden subtext woven into any magical contract, showing the true intentions behind the words. He agreed to part with it, but his price was as dangerous as it was specific. Deep within the nearby Vivarden fell caverns grew the Ghost Cap Fungus, a rare specimen that emitted a volatile spore cloud capable of unraveling a spellcaster's focus. He needed it for a potion, and he would not retrieve it himself. The cavern was a geologically unstable nightmare, its walls slick with glowing lichen that pulsed in time with the tremors shaking the ground. The ghost cap itself was beautiful, a pale, graceful mushroom that seemed to breathe. But as Elara approached, it released its defense, a shimmering cloud of hallucinogenic spores that filled the air. The very rock around her seemed to melt and flow, shadows twisting into the shapes of long-dead friends and whispered threats. Her concentration, the bedrock of all magic, began to fray at the edges. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Thinking quickly, she wove a dual-layered spell. A shield of alteration magic solidified the air directly around the fungus, containing the spore cloud, while a subtle field of restoration energy enveloped her own mind, calming the neural chaos and allowing her to see through the visual static. It was a delicate, exhausting act of will, a testament to how far she had come from simple scroll reading. With steady hands, she harvested the fungus, sealing it in a lead-lined pouch. She emerged from the cavern weary but triumphant, the precious fungus secured. Her victory, however, was short-lived. Returning to Malin's spire, she found his chambers ransacked, the signs of a struggle evident in overturned alchemical tables and a lingering ozone scent of powerful magic. The wizard was gone. On his empty desk, left almost as a taunt, sat the glass eye of truth. Beside it was a single, cryptic note. Its message was chilling. Malin had been taken by the Silent Watcher, the entity that had first sensed her activities. The note warned her of a greater threat, a shadowy figure known only as the Weaver of Fates, a being who did not merely enforce magical contracts, but actively twisted their outcomes, manipulating clauses and beneficiaries from behind the scenes. Her mentor's plight was not an accident, but a deliberate thread pulled from the tapestry of fate. The note ended with a single, ominous direction, a name that promised both answers and greater peril, the bustling capital city of the province, where all threads of power eventually converged. The imperial city's grand plaza was a tapestry of noise and motion, but Elara moved through the crowd like a ghost. Her focus narrowed on a nondescript door tucked between a spice merchant and a bookseller, Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and ozone. The clandestine meeting of mages was already underway, their hushed voices circling a chamber lit only by floating crystals. She raised the glass eye of truth, its milky surface swirling as she scanned the assembled figures. Each mage appeared as a nexus of magical intent, their auras a complex weave of ambition and power. Then she saw it. One figure, a woman in the robes of a high-ranking synod mage, did not simply possess an aura. She was connected to the others by faint, glistening threads of energy, threads she was subtly pulling and twisting as the conversation turned to pact law. This was the Weaver of Fates. As Elara stepped forward to denounce her, the room fell silent. The Weaver's polite smile did not reach her cold eyes. "You are too late, little scholar," she said, her voice a soft, binding weave itself. "I hereby claim your will as forfeit, your magic as my own." The words were a quickened contract, a verbal snare meant to shackle Elara's mind in an instant. But Elara was ready. She spoke a single, resonant syllable of negation, a counterspell constructed from the lexicon's principles and her own hard-won knowledge. It was not a clash of fire and lightning, but a war of definitions, her word severing the conceptual framework of the Weaver's spell before it could take root. The magical backlash was silent and invisible, but it hit Elara like a physical blow, draining her magicka reserves completely and leaving her trembling and hollow. The Weaver, shocked by the failure of her binding, retaliated with a raw blast of force that shattered the chamber's central table and sent mages scrambling for cover. The chaos drew the attention of the city guard, their shouts echoing from the street. In her frantic escape, the Weaver knocked over a stack of scrolls, and from within her robes, a small, leather-bound ledger tumbled to the floor. Elara snatched it as the guards burst into the room. Its pages were a meticulous record of tampered fates. Dozens of contracts were listed, each with an original beneficiary and a new, manipulated outcome. Her fingers traced the entry for her own scroll, the Soul Weaver's Accord. The ledger confirmed her worst fear. The Pact's power was not self-sustaining. It was being actively fueled, its metaphysical weight anchored to a physical object, an Aylid focusing stone hidden away for centuries. According to the notes, that stone lay dormant now, waiting in the silent, flooded chambers of a sunken ruin deep within the heart of the wilderness. To break the contract for good, she would have to find it. The murky water of Lake Rumer closed over Elara's head, the world above dissolving into a muffled, greenish gloom. Her enchanted amulet allowed her to draw breath from the water itself, but it did nothing to ease the crushing pressure of the depths or the oppressive silence of the sunken city below. Fallen spires of white stone reached up like the bones of a drowned giant, their surfaces carved with the distinctive, swirling patterns of the Aylids. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each kick sending clouds of silt swirling through the beams of pale light that pierced the water from above. Following the ledger's clues, she navigated the grand, collapsed corridors, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. And then she saw it, in the center of a vast, circular chamber, resting on a pedestal that seemed untouched by time. It was the Aylid focusing stone, a crystalline heart that pulsed with a soft, malevolent light, its rhythmic glow synchronizing with the faint, painful tug she still felt on her own soul. As she drew closer, the water around the stone began to churn. A form coalesced from the liquid and light, a towering guardian of shimmering, solidified water and blinding radiance. It had no face, only a singular purpose: to defend the heart. It moved with impossible speed, a spear of condensed water forming in its hand and lancing toward her. To fight it directly was to risk shattering the very artifact she needed, an act that would surely unleash the contract's full, unrestrained power in a catastrophic backlash. There was only one path. She wove her hands through the water, her magicka flowing out to create 3 perfect illusions of herself. The decoys swam in different directions, their movements a mirror of her own panic. The guardian hesitated, its luminous attention divided. It struck at the first illusion, which dissolved into a harmless spray of bubbles, then the second and the third. With each attack, the guardian's form flickered, its brilliant light dimming slightly as it expended its ancient energy on phantoms. The moment it dissipated into a final, shimmering mist, Elara surged forward. Her fingers closed around the crystalline heart. It was cold, so cold it burned, and the malevolent pulse within it stuttered and faded. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so powerful it felt like a physical warmth. Somewhere, far away, she knew the metaphysical chains on her mentor had just loosened, but her victory was terrifyingly brief. The moment the heart left its pedestal, the entire ruin groaned. A deep, subterranean tremor shook the lakebed, and a large section of the chamber's ceiling, weakened by centuries of water, gave way. A cascade of stone and debris crashed down, sealing the only exit. Trapped in the collapsing chamber, the unstable heart in her hand, Elara now felt a new presence, a familiar, chilling attention focusing on her from the other side of the rubble. The Watcher had felt the tremor, and it was here. The air in the collapsed chamber tasted of crushed stone and ozone. Before her, the Watcher solidified from the swirling dust, no longer a distant presence, but a towering figure of condensed magical energy, its form a shifting vortex of silent, destructive intent. Elara raised the glass eye of truth, and its milky surface revealed the horror beneath the spectacle. This was not a willing guardian, but a tortured spirit, its essence bound and contorted by glistening chains of script that burned with the same malevolent light as the heart in her hand. It was a slave, just as her mentor had been. Its first attack was a lance of pure force that she barely deflected with a shimmering ward. The backlash vibrated through her, and the Aylid heart in her satchel flared, a sharp, painful pulse that cracked its crystalline surface. Each defensive spell she cast, each burst of energy she redirected, was causing irreparable damage to the very artifact she needed to save her mentor. To fight was to lose everything. The only path forward was a terrible gamble, to use the Watcher's own nature against it. She recalled a clause of release from the Lexicon, a specific sequence meant to sever a spiritual bond without annihilating the spirit itself. As the Watcher gathered energy for another strike, she didn't raise a ward. Instead, she spoke, her voice steady despite the tremors shaking the ruin. She recited the words not as an attack, but as an offering of truth, naming the bonds that held it and declaring them void. The effect was instantaneous. The glistening chains of light shattered, the Watcher's form stilled, the raging vortex calming into a peaceful, luminous shape. For a brief moment, it seemed to bow its head in gratitude, before dissolving into a shower of harmless, fading sparks. Her relief was cut short by a violent shudder from the satchel. The freed spirit's energy had destabilized the heart completely. It was now pulsing erratically, its light flaring like a dying star, ready to unleash all its contained power in a single, catastrophic blast. She had mere seconds. Frantically, she pulled the lexicon from her pack, her fingers trembling as she found the page on metaphysical stabilization. She shouted the phrase inscribed there, a sequence of tonal harmonics that resonated with the heart's own frequency. The erratic pulsing slowed, the violent light receding back into a dull, contained glow. It was stable, but only just. As the ceiling groaned again, she clutched the contained heart and scrambled through a newly opened fissure in the wall, escaping the sunken tomb just as it collapsed into itself behind her. She had survived the confrontation and secured the key to her mentor's freedom, but the heart remained a volatile, ticking clock in her hands. The stabilized heart pulsed with a weak, rhythmic light on her mentor's chest, its containment field a fragile dam, holding back a metaphysical tide. Elara watched, her hope fraying, as the curse simply rerouted its flow. The dark veins creeping up his neck did not recede, they only slowed their advance, the contract proving itself a living, adaptive thing. In a moment of painful lucidity, his hand found hers, his voice a dry whisper. He confessed a secret shame, a youthful attempt to shatter a pact, not unlike this one. He had failed, and in that failure, a splinter of his own soul had been torn away and left bound to the old magic. This was the vulnerability the new contract had exploited, latching onto that pre-existing weakness like a parasite. The truth was a cold weight in her stomach. Any direct attempt to sever the new bonds might unravel the delicate state of that old, trapped fragment, consuming what remained of his soul in the process. Her desire to save him was now in direct conflict with the risk of destroying him utterly. Her solution was a desperate, dangerous gambit. Using the principles she had learned, she combined the stabilizing frequency of the Aylid heart with the focused containment of a soul gem. The resulting device did not break the curse, but it acted as a temporary prison, carefully drawing the afflicted soul fragment into its crystalline depths. The immediate decline halted. Her mentor's breathing deepened, the dark veins receding slightly, but this new equilibrium came with a terrifying cost. The soul gem now glowed with a faint, captive light, a piece of his very essence made terrifyingly physical. It was no longer a metaphysical battle, but a tangible one. The gem could be stolen, shattered, or misused by any mage who understood its value. To protect it, she needed a sanctuary beyond the reach of common thieves and prying entities. Her path led north, through blizzard-swept passes, to the ancient, isolated college of Winterhold, a fortress of knowledge rumored to house artifacts too dangerous for the wider world. The frozen roads to Winterhold were a gauntlet of howling wind and biting cold. Elara's every step crunched through the deepening snow, her body a tight coil of exhaustion and focus. A shimmering dome of protective energy encased her, a ward against both the storm and the more insidious threats she felt circling just beyond the whiteout. Magical predators, drawn by the soul gem's potent signature, stalked her progress, their presence a cold pressure against her magical senses. When the blizzard became a blinding wall of white, she was forced to seek refuge in the mouth of a nearby ice cave. The reprieve was short-lived. From the glistening walls, frost spirits materialized, their forms like shifting, jagged ice, and their attention fixed entirely on the faint glow emanating from her pack. They were not merely curious, they were hungry for the raw soul energy within. The first spirit lunged, and Elara met it with a surge of fire. A cloak of roaring flames erupted around her, driving the creatures back with hisses of steam. But each defensive spell came at a cost. She felt the delicate containment field around the gem waver with every expenditure of her magicka, the protective enchantments flickering like a guttering candle. It was a brutal test of endurance, a battle where winning too aggressively could mean losing everything. She reached the towering stone bridge of the College of Winterhold, not as a scholar, but as a bedraggled survivor, the soul gem clutched tightly in her numb hand. The sanctuary she had hoped for was fraught with its own perils. The mages were embroiled in bitter internal disputes, and many viewed the unstable, powerful artifact she carried not as a life to be saved, but as a catastrophic risk to their already precarious standing in Skyrim. They argued for its immediate destruction. The Archmage, a weary-looking Breton named Talfdir, listened to her desperate plea. He saw the truth of her story, but the political pressure was immense. His offer of help came with a condition, a test to prove her intentions were purely for salvation and not for personal power. Deep within a nearby Dwemer ruin, a place of rusted metal and forgotten automations, lay the Staff of Magnus. Lost for an age, its power to stabilize and control magical energies was legendary. If she could retrieve it, she would have the perfect tool to safely separate her mentor's soul from the gem without causing a backlash. But the ruin was also a tomb for the overambitious, and the staff itself was a treasure countless mages had died trying to claim. The silence of the Dwemer ruin was a heavy, metallic thing, broken only by the drip of condensed steam and the distant, rhythmic clanking of ancient machinery. Elara moved through the grand, brass-lined halls, her every sense alert. The path to the Staff of Magnus was not a simple corridor. It was a gauntlet of logic and lethal precision. She faced rotating floor puzzles, where a single misstep would trigger volleys of steam-powered darts, and pressure plate sequences that had to be activated in a specific, counterintuitive order. Each solved puzzle was a small victory, a step closer to the power that could save her mentor. Finally, in a circular chamber dominated by a massive, silent gear mechanism, she found it. The Staff of Magnus rested on a central pedestal, its crystalline head pulsing with a soft, gray light that seemed to absorb the very energy from the air. The moment her fingers closed around the cold metal shaft, the chamber roared to life. Hissing vents sealed the entrance behind her with massive brass doors, and the room began to fill with a thick, disorienting steam that clouded her vision and muffled all sound. She was trapped. Raising the staff, she felt its nullification field activate, a bubble of absolute magical silence extending from its tip. A swinging, bladed pendulum, enchanted to seek living flesh, froze in midair as the field touched it. A glyph on the floor, primed to erupt in flame, flickered and died, but the field was unstable, its power straining the ancient Dwemer infrastructure. The entire chamber groaned, dust and bits of metal shaking loose from the ceiling. Using the staff to simply smash her way out risked bringing the entire mountain down on her head. She had to be a surgeon, not a sledgehammer. Carefully, she directed the nullification field at the seams of the sealed door, unraveling the magical bonds that held its gears in place. The effort was immense, and she watched the staff's core light dim, from a bright pulse to a faint, steady glow. The primary charge, the power needed for the delicate soul separation, was being consumed to save her life. With a final, grinding shriek, the door gave way. She stumbled out into the crisp mountain air, the staff in her hand now feeling like little more than a fancy rod, its great power reduced to a residual spark. Her relief was shattered by a smooth, arrogant voice. "That is a relic you are not qualified to possess." A tall, elegantly dressed Altmer, in the distinctive robes of the Thalmor, emerged from the tree line, flanked by 2 armed justiciars. His eyes flicked from the depleted staff to the satchel at her hip, where the soul gem glowed. "You will hand over both the artifact and the captured soul. In exchange, you may walk away from this place." His smile was thin and merciless. "The Thalmor have a use for such powerful, binding magics. Refuse, and we will simply take them from your corpse." No, the word was flat and absolute, hanging in the frozen air between them. Before the Thalmor agent's smug expression could even shift to anger, Elara's hands were moving. She wove a cloak of invisibility around herself, not of light bending, but of mental misdirection, a spell that whispered "you see nothing" to the minds of her pursuers. She turned and ran, her boots crunching through the snow as the spell's fragile veil settled over her. Shouts of alarm erupted behind her, followed by the sharp, sizzling sound of a spell being cast. A bolt of lightning seared the tree she had just passed, filling the air with the scent of ozone and burnt pine. The chase was on. She was a flicker in the blizzard, her own breath loud in her ears, the soul gem a heavy, dangerous weight against her hip. She could feel the Thalmor agent's fury like a physical heat at her back. Then came a new sound, a chorus of guttural howls that seemed to vibrate through the very snow. He had summoned his hounds. These were not beasts of flesh and blood, but constructs of magical force and ice, their forms shimmering with a cold, blue light. They did not track her scent or footprints. They were locked onto the soul gem's unique aura, an arcane beacon she could not extinguish. For hours, it was a desperate, exhausting dance. She would pause behind a rock, clutching the gem to her chest, trying to muffle its signal with layers of warding spells. But the moment she cast any significant magic, the gem's containment field would flicker dangerously, the light within stuttering as if in pain. She was trapped, forced to keep moving, her magicka reserves dwindling as she defended against the hound's lunges with the barest whispers of defensive spells. She could not fight them directly without risking everything. She needed a distraction, something with a presence so violent it would override the hound's magical programming. She remembered the territorial frost trolls that haunted these high passes. Changing course, she led the Spectral Pact toward a narrow canyon she knew was one such creature's domain. The gamble was terrifying. As she sprinted past the troll's ice-covered cave, she let her invisibility spell drop for a single, reckless second, making sure the hound saw her clearly. Then she recast it and scrambled up a steep, rocky ledge. The hounds poured into the canyon, their focus entirely on the spot where she had vanished. The enraged roar of the frost troll, echoed off the stone walls as it emerged, a shaggy mountain of muscle and rage. It saw the magical intruders in its home and charged. The ensuing battle was a chaos of snapping ice and tearing claws. While the hounds and the troll tore into each other, Elara slipped away into the deepening twilight, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had escaped, but the cost was immense. The Thalmor agent had seen her face and understood her purpose. She was no longer just a rogue mage with an artifact. She was a named enemy of a powerful faction, her every future move now a potential trap. When the spires of the college finally came into view, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a final, fragile refuge. She staggered into the Archmage's study, her clothes torn and frost-rimed. Thalfdir's eyes widened at the sight of the depleted Staff of Magnus in her grip and the frantic glow of the soul gem. "There is no time," she gasped, explaining the Thalmor's pursuit. "We must secure it now." He understood the immediacy of the threat. Together, they focused the staff's last, residual spark of power, not for the great work of soul separation, but for a more urgent task. They wove its nullifying energy into a new, reinforced containment field around the gem, a lattice of magical silence that would, they hoped, hide its aura from any further tracking spells. The gem's light softened, becoming steady and muted, its desperate pulse finally calmed. For the moment, it was safe, but the Thalmor were still out there, and they knew exactly what she was trying to do. The temporary safety of the soul gem was a fragile illusion, and the Archmage knew it. Thalfdir's gaze was heavy with a grim necessity as he led Elara to a sealed, circular chamber deep within the college. "This is not a punishment," he said, his voice echoing in the magically inert room. "It is a precaution. To trust you with our deepest secrets, I must be certain your understanding is not just theoretical, but instinctual." The air shimmered, and the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of shifting light and sound. When her senses cleared, Elara stood in a perfect replica of her own study, the Soul Weaver's Accord glowing on her desk. A phantom image of her mentor lay on a cot nearby, his condition visibly deteriorating by the second. The simulation had begun. The dummy contract was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It presented a false, rapidly approaching deadline, a ticking clock that screamed for a hasty, ill-considered solution. Spectral whispers echoed her own deepest fears, urging her to make a quick bargain, to sacrifice a little more of her own power for a faster result. It was a perfect mirror of the original Pact's cruelest tricks, preying on compassion and desperation. She felt the pressure building, a frantic urge to act rising in her chest. But then she forced herself to breathe, to look past the emotional torrent. She remembered the ashen wastes of Morrowind, the way the spectral mage had woven its deceptions. She saw that same pattern here, a reliance on rushed assumptions and emotional triggers. Instead of trying to break the main clause, she focused on a seemingly minor subclause about lunar alignment. Using her knowledge of the original summoning site's astrological chart, she proved the clause was based on an impossible celestial event. The moment she vocalized this logical inconsistency, the entire dummy contract flared a brilliant white and then dissolved into harmless motes of light. The simulated realm vanished, and she was back in the circular chamber, stumbling as a wave of magical exhaustion washed over her. She had succeeded, but the cost of failure had been real, the threat of a burnout that would have left her utterly helpless. Thalfdir offered a rare, approving smile. "Your field work has given you a wisdom no textbook could," he admitted. "You see the intent behind the ink." With a wave of his hand, a section of the chamber wall slid away, revealing a descending staircase. "The deepest archives are now open to you. Find the counterpart." What she discovered in the dust-shrouded silence below was more terrifying than she had feared. The scroll was not a simple copy. It was a mirror pact. Its enchantments were designed to reflect any alteration made to the original, amplifying the metaphysical backlash and striking directly at the one who attempted the change. Her every effort to save her mentor could have been turned into the very weapon that destroyed him. The mirror pact was a perfect, malevolent echo. Every rune Elara traced in her mind, every potential solution she devised to sever the bonds on her own scroll, was reflected back with 10 times the force in the counterpart's enchantments. A direct break would not just fail, it would unleash a storm of unfocused magical energy, a cataclysm that could warp the laws of reality in a mile-wide radius. The solution was not destruction, but perfect balance. She had to perform a ritual of simultaneous nullification, inscribing runes of absolute cancellation on both pacts at the precise same instant, so their mirrored energies would collide and annihilate each other without a trace of backlash. The theory was sound, but the execution was impossible for a single person. The ritual demanded 2 mages of equal skill and focus, working in perfect harmony. Her gaze fell on the college's containment cells, carved into the ice far below. There was only one other person who possessed the necessary, deep understanding of pact weaving, the only one who could possibly keep pace with her. The Weaver of Fates. The irony was a bitter pill. To save one soul, she would have to free the very entity who had conspired to trap it. She descended the cold, winding stairs to the prison level, the air growing thick with silence and suppressed magic. She stood before the enchanted ice of the Weaver's cell, watching the woman who had tried to claim her, while now sitting perfectly composed on a stone bench. Elara laid out the brutal, simple truth of the mirror pact and the consequences of inaction. "I am not offering you freedom," Elara stated, her voice steady. "I am offering you a choice. Help me perform this ritual and avert a disaster you helped create, or remain here and be consumed by the chaotic energies when the pact inevitably unravels." The Weaver's cold eyes studied her, calculating the angles of this new, unforeseen contract. A slow, sharp smile touched her lips. An elegant solution, she conceded. "Very well, I will hold up my end of this temporary accord, but know this, little scholar. The moment the last rune is sealed, our business will resume." The alliance was forged, a blade of necessity poised to cut both ways. Redemption is a currency the Weaver understands all too well. Elara's offer was not about forgiveness, but leverage. She proposed a new, temporary contract, the Weaver's assistance in the ritual in exchange for a full testimony against the other corrupt mages she had manipulated. It was a chance to trade one form of power for another, the power of survival. The Weaver's agreement came with a razor's edge of a warning. The Thalmor, she revealed, were not just hunting from the outside. They had agents inside the college, mages who wore the robes of allies, but answered to a different master. Their plan was to let Elara and the Weaver complete the arduous ritual, draining themselves in the process, and then seize both pacts at their moment of perfect nullification. Trusting this woman felt like holding a live serpent, knowing its nature was to bite. Every past action showed a being who twisted outcomes for her own benefit. Yet the ritual demanded too. Elara's decision was a calculated one. She would proceed, but not blindly. As they prepared the ritual site in the highest observatory, a room open to the star-filled Skyrim night, Elara wove her own safeguards. She inscribed nearly invisible runes of binding into the stone floor around the weaver's position, a magical tripwire that would activate the moment the other mage attempted any spell not directly tied to the ritual sequence. It was a cage within a collaboration. The stakes were impossibly high. The astral alignment necessary for the simultaneous nullification was a fleeting event, a window of less than an hour where the celestial energies would be precisely mirrored. They had one chance, a single opportunity to get every syllable and gesture perfect before the alignment passed and the pacts became permanently locked. As they began the final preparations, arranging the two scrolls on opposite lecterns, Elara's eyes caught a flicker of movement in the courtyard far below. It was not a student on a late night walk. The figures moved with a coordinated, military precision, their positions slowly encircling the base of the observatory tower. The Thalmor were not waiting for the ritual to end. They were moving into position to control its beginning. The first Thalmor agent revealed himself not with a shout, but with a subtle twist of his hand, a flicker of transmutation magic aimed at the northern rune. Elara's focus was split, her mind halfway through the celestial calculations for the inscription. She saw the sabotage attempt in her peripheral vision, a warping of the precise lines she had carved into the stone. There was no time for a complex counterspell. A brief, violent skirmish erupted in the observatory as two other agents shed their student disguises, blades of conjured light flashing into existence. Elara was caught in an impossible bind, forced to divide her concentration between the life or death combat and the delicate, soul-deep work of the ritual. One demanded brute force and instinct, the other absolute calm and precision. To fail at either meant total catastrophe. Her gaze snapped to the weaver, whose own hands were poised over the southern rune. The trust she had to extend in that moment was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. "Hold them," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I must finish this." The weaver's response was a thin, dangerous smile, but she turned from the runes without argument, her hands weaving a complex tapestry of offensive magic that filled the air with shards of solidified shadow and lances of raw force. She held the line, a surprisingly effective and brutal guardian, but the fight was not without cost. A stray bolt of energy, deflected by a Thalmor blade, sizzled past its target and struck the observatory's central focusing orb. The ancient crystal, which had been humming with a steady, guiding light, shuddered violently. A web of cracks appeared across its surface, and the stable magical field in the room dissolved into a storm of unpredictable fluctuations. The very fabric of the spellwork wavered, the harmonic frequencies needed for the nullification becoming distorted and unstable. The ritual's timing, once perfectly aligned with the stars above, was now slipping, thrown into chaotic disarray by the orb's failure. Elara had no time to panic. She immediately adjusted her approach, her hands moving now not with practiced grace, but with frantic intuition. She could no longer rely on the orb's guidance. She had to feel the distortions, reading the wild energy surges like a sailor, navigating a storm by the feel of the wind. Every rune she inscribed became a gamble, a correction made on the fly against a clock that was no longer ticking in any predictable rhythm. The final rune burned itself into the scroll with the light of a dying star. At the exact same instant, across the chamber, the weaver's hand completed the same symbol on the mirror pact. For a heartbeat, there was only silence and the perfect, terrifying symmetry of their actions. Then the twin pacts erupted. The scrolls did not burn, they dissolved, their magical substance unraveling into threads of raw power that spiraled upward, colliding to form a roaring vortex of light and sound directly above the cracked focusing orb. The air screamed with released energy, pulling books from shelves and threatening to tear the very stones from the floor. Seeing his prize disintegrating, the Thalmor leader lunged through the chaos, his hand outstretched to seize the swirling core of the vortex. Elara did not hesitate. With the last dregs of her magicka, a final reserve she had sworn to keep for herself, she wove a net of pure will. She did not fight the vortex. She embraced it, her spell reinforcing its chaotic borders and funneling its apocalyptic force downward, directly into the shattered orb. The crystal flared, its web of cracks blazing with intolerable light as it drank the Pact's entire history, its clauses and curses, and all their malignant intent. And in that moment of ultimate nullification, she felt it, a thin, silver thread of connection, one she had carried for so long she had almost forgotten its weight, simply snapped. The bond to her mentor's soul fragment was gone, severed not by a blade, but by a perfect, resonant silence. The vortex vanished. The orb glowed with a soft, steady, and utterly stable light. The room was still, the pacts were gone, but the soul gem on the pedestal now pulsed with a lonely, isolated rhythm. The fragment within was free of the contract's curse, but it was now utterly untethered, a fading ember without a hearth to call home. Its survival was no longer a question of breaking chains, but of finding a new anchor in the world. The soul fragment pulsed in its gem, a quiet, lonely star adrift in a sea of nothing. Elara stood with Archmage Thalfdir, the solution they had constructed, feeling more like a delicate cage than a triumph. The fragment was free from the contract, but it was fading, its connection to life severed. Thalfdir proposed a radical act of soul smithing, a forbidden art that walked the line between salvation and grotesque artifice. They would not attempt the impossible task of reforging the splinter back into her mentor's whole soul. Instead, they would house it within a new vessel, a specially crafted amulet that could sustain its unique identity indefinitely. It was a life, but a bounded one, a consciousness contained within a locket of enchanted moonstone and silver. The ritual for the transfer was terrifyingly delicate. It required a constant, stabilizing anchor, a tether of shared life, to convince the fragment it was not being imprisoned, but being given a new home. Elara understood the price before Thalfdir could even speak it. She offered her hand, and with a sharp, silver knife, let a single drop of her blood fall onto the empty amulet's core. The drop did not beat up, it was absorbed, spreading through the metal like a vein of living crimson. In that instant, a bond snapped into place, a profound and permanent connection. She could feel the fragment's fragile presence, not as an external force, but as a second, quieter heartbeat within her own chest. The transfer was a success. Her mentor's eyes opened, clear for the first time in years, his mind his own again, but the cost of that clarity was a new, shared vulnerability. The amulet was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It was a phylactery for a piece of his soul, and it was now irrevocably tied to Elara's own life force. Any significant damage to the amulet would not just risk the fragment, it would wound her, a metaphysical feedback loop that could cripple or even kill them both. She accepted this without hesitation, clasping the cool metal around her own neck. It was a fair price, a burden she would carry gladly to see the light back in his eyes. Yet, she knew this amulet was a beacon. The Thalmor, the Weaver's other associates, any mage who had sensed the contract's immense power, they would all still be searching. They would covet a soul shard that had survived a mirror Pacts nullification, a unique artifact of incredible magical resilience. Its existence had to become her most guarded secret. To better hide this singular treasure, she realized she would have to create a forest for the trees. She began to teach, quietly at first, taking on a handful of dedicated students at the college. She shared the principles of the Lexicon, the techniques for seeing past magical deceptions, the brutal logic of Pact law. She was not just instructing them, she was building a new school of thought, a discipline of magical deciphering. In a world now filled with her methods, her unique amulet would be just one of many fascinating artifacts, its true nature obscured by the very knowledge she was spreading to protect it. Her hidden academy took root not in grand towers, but in the whispering halls of an abandoned dwarven outpost, its stone walls a natural shield against magical scrying. Here, Elara began teaching the principles she had bled to learn, the art of reading intent behind the ink. Her first students were a small, cautious group, their trust earned through shared peril. Among them, cloaked in simple gray robes, was the Weaver of Fates. The woman's presence was a constant, silent test of Elara's own philosophy. Redemption, it seemed, was a pact the Weaver was now determined to fulfill. Her brilliant, devious mind redirected toward teaching others how to spot the very traps she had once laid. Yet, trust could not be given freely. Elara knew this knowledge was a weapon, and not every student sought to be a guardian. Some eyes gleamed with a hunger for power, seeing the lexicon's loopholes not as escapes, but as legalistic weapons to craft even more binding agreements for their own benefit. This required a foundation stronger than stone. On the first day, Elara gathered her students in the central chamber, the air humming with the outpost's ancient energies. She did not ask for a promise. Instead, she initiated a G's of shared consequence, a magical oath where any intentional misuse of the Academy's teachings to ensnare a soul would rebound upon the caster with threefold force. It was a brutal, self-enforcing clause, a practical application of their own lessons. The Thalmor did not take long to notice this new school of thought. To them, it was heresy. Their control over magical law depended on Pacts being obscure, dangerous, and ultimately requiring their official oversight to navigate. An institution that taught self-reliance was a direct threat to their authority. Rumors began to circulate of missing merchants who had supplied the Academy, and scouts reported seeing Thalmor justiciars asking pointed questions in nearby villages. The isolation that had once been their protection was becoming a vulnerability, Faced with this growing pressure, Elara made a calculated decision. She could not fight the Thalmor alone. She would need to weave a web of alliances to anchor her academy in the political realities of the world. Her first overtures were to the independent guilds, the reclusive Psijic Order, and the pragmatic Mages Guild remnants, who valued knowledge over control. She offered not subservience, but exchange, a chance to collaborate in safeguarding a dangerous branch of magic from those who would monopolize it. The response was cautious, but a few envoys agreed to visit, their arrival marking a new, precarious chapter for the Hidden Academy. The stone halls of the Hidden Academy felt safer with each new envoy, but safety was an illusion. True security required more than secrecy. It demanded allies with real power. Elara began a quiet pilgrimage across Skyrim's holds, offering her unique services to Jarls and guild masters as a demonstration of her academy's worth. Her first true test came in the court of a Jarl whose son had foolishly signed a contract with a clan of vengeful Reachfolk. The pact promised fertile hunting grounds, but its hidden clauses were slowly poisoning the land itself, turning the soil barren and the rivers thin. Elara did not simply break the contract. She sat with the clan elders, using the glass eye to reveal how the deceptive wording had also trapped them in a cycle of conflict. She negotiated a new, mutually beneficial accord that dissolved the old magic without backlash, restoring the land and forging a lasting peace. The Jarl's support was immediate and public, his gratitude a shield of political influence for the Academy. Yet every new alliance was a double-edged sword. With the Jarl's endorsement came greater visibility, his court now a stage where Elara's methods were scrutinized by friend and foe alike. Some potential allies, like a powerful East Empire company director, saw her knowledge as a commercial weapon. He offered immense funding and protection, but only if the Academy's teachings remained exclusive to his organization, turning deciphering into a corporate secret. The temptation was real, a chance to secure the Academy's future with a single signature. But Elara remembered the Soul Weaver's Accord, how it preyed on good intentions. She refused, knowing that hoarding this knowledge would betray its very purpose and create the very monopolies she sought to dismantle. Her integrity cost her the company's gold, but it earned something more valuable, the quiet respect of neutral factions like the Bard's College, who valued principle over profit. This principled stand, however, sharpened the Thalmor's focus into a blade. They could no longer dismiss her as a reclusive scholar. She was now a political actor, building a coalition that challenged their ideological control. Their tactics shifted from mere observation to active subversion. Whispers began to circulate in the highest circles of magical commerce, rumors of a Thalmor project so ambitious it chilled the blood. They were said to be crafting a perfect contract, a document woven from uncontestable logic and flawless magical theory, designed to be unbreakable and all-enforcing. Its purpose was not to trap a single soul, but to codify their authority into the fabric of reality itself, a magical instrument of absolute law that would make dissent not just illegal, but metaphysically impossible. The Thalmor's perfect contract was no longer a whispered rumor in shadowed courts. Its blueprint lay in a heavily guarded outpost, a spire of pale stone that pierced the sky over the Jural Mountains. Elara knew a frontal assault was suicide. Instead, she and her most trusted students became ghosts, weaving a collective illusion of a sudden, localized blizzard that masked their approach. They slipped past sentries whose eyes saw only swirling snow, their movements a silent ballet of precision and fear. Inside, the air hummed with arrogant certainty. They found the research notes in a warded library, the pages cold to the touch. The escape was when their luck broke. A novice mage's foot brushed a glyph they had missed, and the silence shattered into screaming alarms. Their retreat became a frantic dash through cascading portals, the Thalmor's furious spells licking at their heels as they tumbled back into the safety of their hidden academy. The stolen documents clutched to Elara's chest. The notes were a descent into a chilling mirror world. The Thalmor had not invented a new magic, they had perfected a perversion of her own. Every principle from the Lexicon of Loopholes, every technique she had developed to free souls, had been inverted and weaponized. Her methods for identifying deceptive clauses were used to craft ones that were logically flawless and emotionally inescapable. Her work on nullification was twisted into a framework for absolute enforcement. The perfect contract was not merely a document. It was a cage built from the very tools meant to pick locks, and it was terrifyingly close to completion. The horror was not just in the threat, but in the realization that her life's work had provided the foundation for this tyranny. A defensive stance would be a slow death. Elara understood that to fight a concept, you needed a better one. She would not wait for the Thalmor to unleash their weapon. She would build the key for the lock before the lock was even forged. Her plan was a work of breathtaking, dangerous genius, a preemptive counter-pact. This would not be a shield, but a seed of negation designed to lay dormant within the fabric of magical law, programmed to activate and unravel the perfect contract the moment its first clause was invoked. It was a metaphysical trap for a metaphysical weapon. Forging such a specific key required components of immense power and rarity, artifacts whose unique magical signatures could resonate with and disrupt the Thalmor's design. The search would pull her students to the far corners of Tamriel. One was sent to the volcanic depths of Morrowind to retrieve a shard of a Dwemer tonal resonator, its vibrations capable of shattering flawless logic. Another was dispatched to the swamps of Black Marsh for a scale from a rare, hypnotic serpent, a creature whose very gaze could redefine perception. A third sought the heartwood of a singing tree from the forests of Valen Wood, its natural harmony, a weapon against imposed order. Each mission was a desperate gamble, sending her fledgling guardians into the wilds while she remained, pouring every ounce of her knowledge into drafting the Counter-Pact's impossibly complex script. The first student returned from Valen Wood, her cloak torn and her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She carried the heartwood, which hummed with a soft, soothing melody. But her news was a blade to the heart. The Thalmor, aware their plans were compromised, had accelerated their timeline. The final sealing ritual for the perfect contract was now days away, not weeks. The margin for error, already razor thin, had vanished completely. The humid air of Black Marsh clung to Elara's skin like a second, suffocating cloak. Her destination was a single, ancient hissed tree, its bark shimmering with a faint, oily light, a specimen rumored to have absorbed the essence of broken oaths for centuries. Its scale was the final component, the only substance capable of absorbing and redirecting the binding energies of the Thalmor's perfect contract. but the tree was not unguarded. The tribal Argonians who protected it emerged from the surrounding swamp without a sound, their scales blending with the shadows, their spears tipped with a venom that promised a slow, paralyzing death. They did not issue a challenge, they simply attacked, their movements a fluid, unified defense of a site they held sacred. To fight them was to desecrate their beliefs and risk a war she could not win. To retreat was to surrender any hope of stopping the Thalmor. Her only path was one of radical exchange. She lowered her staff, allowing a spear point to rest against her throat, and spoke a single, resonant word of cessation. The tribal leader, a massive Argonian named Zealth, halted his warriors. Elara did not plead or threaten. She offered a trade. She had sensed it upon arrival, a cursed Argonian burial mask that was festering in their village, its malignant magic slowly sickening their hunters. She would dissolve its curse, a task their own shamans had failed to do, in exchange for a single scale from the Hist. Zealth agreed, his reptilian eyes unblinking. The work on the mask was a delicate, day-long ordeal, requiring her to untangle a web of vengeful spirits without annihilating them. Success earned her not just the scale, but a measure of the tribe's guarded respect. The scale itself was cool and impossibly light, seeming to drink the light from her palm. Her journey back through the marsh should have been triumphant, but the Thalmor had been waiting. They struck at a narrow causeway where the muddy water provided no cover. Justiciars materialized from behind gnarled trees, their spells turning the very air to fire. Their goal was clear, to seize the scale and silence her forever. The fight was a brutal, close-quarters struggle. Elara was driven to her knees, a barrier spell shattering under the onslaught. In a desperate move, she threw the scale high into the air. As every Thalmor eye instinctively tracked its arc, she unleashed a concussive blast of force into the murky water below the causeway. The impact churned up a thick, blinding cloud of silt and decay, swallowing the battlefield whole. She dove into the opaque water, her hand closing around the falling scale, and swam, half-blinded, through the chaotic gloom. She surfaced far downstream, gasping and alone, the scale still clutched in her fist. The ambush proved one terrifying thing. The Thalmor were no longer just trying to protect their project. They now saw Elara herself as the single greatest threat to its completion, an obstacle that required personal and permanent elimination. The hidden academy's central chamber thrummed with a power it had not felt since the days of the Dwemer. On a stone table etched with concentric circles lay the three artifacts, the heartwood humming its gentle melody, the tonal shard vibrating in a silent frequency, and the Hist scale drinking the light from the air around it. Elara stood at the center, her hands moving in precise arcs as she began the ritual to weave the Counter-Pact. The air itself began to shimmer, pulling the unique energies from each component and braiding them into a single, latent spell form, a shield of negation, waiting for its moment to awaken. It was a beautiful and terrifying process, the birth of a concept made manifest, but such a profound act of magic could not be hidden. The ritual's energy signature flared like a bonfire in the unseen world, a declaration of war that the Thalmor could not possibly miss. Their response was immediate and brutal. The first warning was the shriek of collapsing wards at the outpost's main gate. The Thalmor assault had begun. Spells of pure force hammered against the ancient stone, and the shouts of Elara's students echoed through the halls as they met the invaders in a desperate, chaotic defense. In the ritual chamber, the air wavered with every impact. Elara's focus was being torn in two, the delicate threads of the Counter-Pact threatening to unravel with each distant explosion. She made the only choice she could. She met the gaze of the Weaver of Fates, who stood guarding the chamber's entrance, and then looked to her most senior students. "Hold this line," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "I must finish this." It was an immense act of trust, placing the defense of everything she had built, and her very life, into the hands of those she had once fought. The battle raged through the corridors, a storm of lightning and ice against shields of will and cunning. The Weaver fought with a terrifying, focused efficiency, her spells a masterclass in turning an enemy's strength against them. But the Thalmor were relentless, their numbers and discipline slowly pushing the defenders back. The ritual neared its climax, the artifacts on the table beginning to fuse their energies into a single, glowing sphere of potential. At that exact moment, the chamber's reinforced doors exploded inward, shattered by a coordinated blast of magical force. The Thalmor leader stood framed in the wreckage, his eyes locked not on Elara, but on the nearly complete Counter-Pact. He saw his perfect victory about to be stolen. In a reckless, arrogant move, he unrolled his own scroll, the perfect contract, its script blazing with absolute authority. He began to rid its first clause, not to enact its grand design, but to use its raw, overwhelming power to bind every soul in the room to his immediate command. The air screamed as two realities collided. The Thalmor leader's words of absolute law met the silent, waiting negation of Elara's Counter-Pact. A visible shockwave of warring energies erupted from the scrolls, one a blade of pure coercion, the other a shield of unraveling intent. The clash did not produce a simple explosion, but a chaotic storm of conflicting directives that ripped through the chamber. Mages on both sides cried out, clutching their heads as the very concepts of command and freedom warred inside their minds. The ancient stone of the academy groaned in protest, dust and small fragments of rock raining from the ceiling as the foundational magic holding the outpost together began to fray under the metaphysical strain. Elara stood at the eye of this hurricane, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the immense effort of will required to manually guide the Counter-Pact's diffuse energy. She could not simply let the two forces cancel each other out. That would risk a nullification so violent it would unmake every enchanted thing in the room. She had to carefully funnel the perfect contract's binding power, directing its flow like a surgeon diverting a poisoned river. Her focus narrowed to the cool, light-absorbing hiss scale resting on the stone table. She pushed the entire conflict toward it, a torrent of tyrannical magic seeking an outlet. The scale flared with a dark, hungry light, drinking in the coercive energy, neutralizing its malicious intent, and releasing it as a harmless, shimmering mist that dissipated into the air, stripping the Thalmor's ultimate weapon of all its power in a matter of heartbeats. Enraged by the utter ruin of his life's work, the Thalmor leader ignored the collapsing room and raised a hand wreathed in killing lightning, aiming not for a strategic victory, but for a final, petty vengeance against Elara herself. He never completed the cast. The Weaver of Fates moved with a speed born of long-awaited resolve, interposing his body between them. He did not raise a ward. Instead, he opened himself fully, taking the lethal blast into his own magical core. The act was one of absolute sacrifice, a consumption of his very essence that shattered the attack and left him standing for a moment, a look of profound, quiet peace on his face, before he dissolved into a cascade of fading, luminous motes. His redemption, once a transaction, was now a final, fulfilled contract written not in ink, but in choice. The weaver's sacrifice left a profound silence in its wake, a quiet broken only by the groans of the settling stone and the ragged breaths of the survivors. His final act, an exchange of his own essence for their collective future, had not just saved them, it had rewritten the very meaning of his legacy. In the stunned aftermath, the remaining students swiftly subdued the Thalmor leader, his arrogance finally broken as he was bound in chains of his own shattered ambition. The perfect contract was now just a scorched and inert scroll, its terrifying power drained completely by the hiss scale and rendered permanently harmless. Elara felt the loss like a physical ache, a complex sorrow for the brilliant, flawed being who had chosen redemption in the end. But grief was a luxury for quieter times. The academy was critically damaged, its wards fractured, and many of its defenders wounded. Her first duty was to the living, drawing on the hiss scale's residual, stabilizing energy. She wove its unique properties into the very foundations of the outpost. The new wards she created were not merely stronger, they were smarter, imbued with the scale's ability to absorb and neutralize hostile magic, making the academy a true sanctuary, more secure than it had ever been before. News of the battle and the Weaver's ultimate sacrifice spread like wildfire through discreet magical channels. It was not just a story of victory, but one of courage and costly principle. This proof of the Academy's unwavering resolve became its most powerful recruitment tool. Within weeks, new allies and aspiring students began to arrive from every province, from independent mages tired of Thalmor oversight to young scholars hungry for a more ethical path to power. While organizing the influx of new applicants, Elara found it tucked away in the Weaver's old quarters, a simple, leather-bound journal. There was no sentimental inscription, only a note in his precise handwriting that read, "The work continues." The pages within contained his life's research, a deep and startlingly innovative exploration of advanced contract theory that ventured into realms she had never considered. It was not a weapon, but a challenge, a final gift that pushed her to look beyond the contracts she knew and question what magical agreements could become in the hands of a wiser generation. Stone by stone, the Academy was rebuilt, its new walls humming with the protective energy of the hissed scale and the memory of sacrifice. Elara oversaw the repairs, but her true work was in the quiet chamber she dedicated as a memorial. Here, she placed the Weaver's journal on a simple pedestal, not as a trophy, but as a testament to a redeemed life. She integrated his most groundbreaking research into the core curriculum, teaching students not to fear complex contracts, but to understand the profound responsibility that comes with wielding them. This act of posthumous honor, of turning an enemy's legacy into a lesson, resonated deeply across magical communities. The Academy's reputation solidified not just as a school of skill, but as a beacon of ethical magical practice. Its graduates became known as arbiters and decipherers, their counsel sought by kings and commoners alike to navigate pacts with clarity and conscience. This very success, however, bred a new kind of resistance. established mage guilds, long accustomed to being the sole authorities on magical law, watched their influence wane. They began a whisper campaign in royal courts and taverns, painting Elara's methods as reckless, her transparency as a threat to the secretive traditions that had, in their view, kept magic safe for centuries. They claimed her teachings could destabilize the delicate balance of power, making dangerous knowledge too accessible. Instead of retreating behind her fortified walls, Elara chose to meet this challenge with radical openness. She initiated public seminars, inviting guild masters and skeptical mages to witness live decipherings of benign but complex contracts. She demonstrated how her techniques exposed hidden dangers and fostered fair agreements, turning their accusations of recklessness into powerful lessons in accountability. Slowly, steadily, public opinion began to turn. The clear, practical benefits of her work overshadowed the guild's vague fears. As the tide of misinformation receded, Elara finally found the political and social stability she needed to return to her most personal quest. With the academy secure and its future bright, she could at last devote her full attention to the fragile, humming amulet against her chest, and the final, delicate step in her mentor's long journey home. The soft glow from the amulet pulsed in time with the mentor's voice as he spoke to a circle of rapt students. Freed from the curse's immediate threat, he now poured a lifetime of arcane knowledge into his lessons, his wisdom lending the academy a gravitas it had previously lacked. Students who had only heard whispers of his ordeal now saw the living proof of their study's purpose, their resolve hardening as they listened. Yet sometimes, in the middle of a complex explanation about tonal harmonics, his hand would fly to his chest, his words faltering as a wave of phantom pain from the old binding washed over him. These echoes were more than memory. They were a physical scar left on his soul. Elara watched these moments with a familiar, protective ache. She began spending her nights not in political strategy, but in deep research, cross-referencing the Weaver's journals with ancient texts on soul theurgy. She developed a delicate ritual of restorative magic, using the positive energy generated by the Academy's own community, the joy of a student's breakthrough, the peace of a quiet study hall, as a balm to soothe the fractured parts of his spirit. Each session was a careful unraveling, and with every success, their shared bond deepened into something unbreakable. But the healing process acted like a lens, magnifying the subtle architecture of the original Soul Weaver's Accord. As she mended one echo, she saw the ghost of another clause, a clever piece of the contract's design that had lain dormant. It was not a single malicious entity, but a replicating pattern, a self-perpetuating formula. The horrifying realization settled upon her like a physical weight. This was not a unique masterpiece of dark magic. It was a prototype. If one such pact had nearly destroyed her mentor and required a coalition to undo, how many others were still active, hidden in plain sight across Tamriel, their victims unaware of the chains they wore? Their search began in the quiet corners of old libraries and the sealed vaults of noble estates. Elara and her most trusted students moved like scholars in shadows, using the lexicon's principles to sense the faint, malevolent hum of binding magic where others saw only faded ink. They were not hunting monsters, but the ghosts of bad promises. What they uncovered was not a handful of isolated curses, but a sprawling, hidden network of forgotten pacts. Some were tied to the founding oaths of ancient families, their power sustaining a dynasty's wealth at a terrible, hidden cost. Others were the secret covenants of societies that had long since faded from memory, their dormant clauses waiting for the right conditions to activate. Each one was a potential disaster, a single word away from unleashing a plague or collapsing a bloodline. The conflict was not always with the magic itself, but with the people who held it. A reclusive clan in the mountains, their children blessed with preternatural strength from a pact with a long-forgotten earth spirit, saw Elara's offer of nullification as a threat to their very identity. They guarded their ancestral scroll not as a curse, but as a sacred gift, and they met her with barred gates and hostile glares. In such moments, Elara insisted on patience. She would not break down the door. Instead, she would sit outside it for days if necessary and teach. She explained the slow, parasitic drain on their land that the pact caused, showing them how the once verdant valley was turning to stone. She used the glass eye to reveal the tiny, accumulating cracks in their children's souls, a price they had never been told. It was a negotiation, not an assault, replacing fear with understanding. Their quiet work averted catastrophes no one else would ever know about. They dissolved a pact in a coastal city that would have summoned a tidal wave as tribute, and neutralized another in a desert kingdom that slowly siphoned the creativity from its artists. With each success, however, they became the guardians of terrifying secrets. They now knew which noble line was built on a foundation of stolen years, and which guild's prosperity was funded by a debt that would eventually come due. This knowledge was a burden as heavy as any artifact, making them both saviors and potential targets for those who would kill to keep their pasts buried. This new role demanded an unending watchfulness, a permanent state of alert. For every old contract they carefully unraveled, they knew a new one was being scribed somewhere in a moment of desperation or greed, its ink still wet and its consequences yet to be written. The final draft of her manuscript was not merely a collection of spells, but a living argument for transparency. Elara titled it The Practitioner's Guide to Pact Law, a deliberate choice to make the intimidating art of the Lexicon of Loopholes accessible to any dedicated mage. She did not hoard this knowledge within her academy's walls. Instead, she personally oversaw the creation of multiple, magically secured copies, and delivered them to the great libraries of Tamriel, from the arcane university to the palace of the kings in Windhelm. Her goal was to see the land with the tools for self-defense, ensuring that no one would ever be as helpless as her mentor had been. The guide's clarity and practical wisdom resonated instantly, and within a few years, it became a foundational text, required reading for apprentices and archmages alike. A new generation of mages began to question the old, secretive ways, their approach to contracts forever changed by her work. This very success, however, ignited a firestorm of professional jealousy. Rival institutions, whose power had long rested on their exclusive command of obscure pact law, saw their influence crumbling. They launched a coordinated campaign to undermine her, publishing their own, hastily written volumes that plagiarized her core concepts, while inserting subtle, dangerous errors. Anonymous critics in magical journals dismissed her work as simplistic and reckless, a threat to the sophisticated traditions of their guilds. Elara understood that a purely magical defense was insufficient. She turned their own tools against them, waging a meticulous legal battle through the courts of Cyrodiil. She argued that magical research was a form of intellectual property, and that her unique synthesis of theory and practice was entitled to protection. Her victory set a landmark precedent, establishing for the first time that a mage's original insights could be legally defended from theft. This legal triumph did more than just protect her book. It solidified her as a public figure, the undeniable leader of a movement pushing for ethical reform in magical practice. Her name became synonymous with the struggle for a more just and understandable magical world. It was this very reputation that prompted a formal summons on heavy, embossed parchment, an invitation to travel to the imperial city and provide counsel to the Elder Council itself on the drafting of new magical legislation. Her voice echoed in the hushed chamber of the Elder Council, a lone, steady sound against the marble and the weight of history. Elara stood before them not as a supplicant, but as an expert, laying bare a truth they had long ignored. She presented a detailed framework for regulating magical contracts, a system built on the principle that binding words have real consequences that ripple through families, cities, and the land itself. She spoke of the Soul Weaver's Accord not as a singular horror, but as a symptom of a world without oversight, where desperation and ambition could forge chains for generations. Her proposal was simple in its goal: to create a body that would certify contracts for fairness, maintain a public registry, and provide neutral arbiters for disputes. The debate that followed was a storm of conflicting ideals. Traditionalist council members invoked the sacred right of magical freedom, arguing that regulation was the first step toward tyranny. Others, swayed by tales of cursed bloodlines and poisoned earth, countered that public safety demanded such a step. The political friction was palpable, a battle between the old world's secrets and a new demand for transparency. Elara watched the arguments volley back and forth, knowing that a perfect proposal would die here today. So she made a choice. She compromised, agreeing to scale back the body's initial authority and exempt certain ancient, personal pacts from immediate scrutiny. It was a bitter concession, but it was the price for planting the seed. Her pragmatism won the day. The Council ratified the formation of the new regulatory body, and her academy was formally tasked with providing its first cadre of expert advisors. The impact was immediate and profound. This new body began its work by auditing the most volatile contracts they could find, from merchant guild agreements to the founding oaths of minor noble houses. They prevented abuses that would have led to war and freed countless souls from insidious bargains. Yet with every success, they earned new enemies. Powerful entities who had thrived in the shadows now found their influence checked, their secret weapons exposed and neutralized. They pushed back with legal challenges and whispered threats, but the foundation held. It was during one of these routine audits, deep in the archives of a long-dead sorcerer king, that an advisor found something that defied all their classifications. It was a contract, but it was written on a material that felt like solidified light and hummed with a power that made the air taste of ozone and age. Its clauses were not in any known language, yet they were instinctively understood by anyone who looked upon them. The most chilling detail was its apparent age. Every dating spell, every historical cross-reference, placed its origin before the dawn of recorded history, a relic from a time when the rules of magic were still being written. The contract's light was not a reflection, but something it generated from within. Elara watched it from behind layers of protective glass, its hum a constant, low thrum in the foundation of the academy. This was no mere relic of a forgotten sorcerer king. Her team's analysis, cross-referenced with every known historical and magical source, pointed to a terrifying truth. They were looking at the first contract, the foundational template from which all magical agreements were said to have been derived. It was not a spell, but a piece of the underlying code of reality, containing the fundamental laws of obligation and consequence. To tamper with it was not to break a single pact, but to risk rewriting the rules of magic for everyone, everywhere. Yet to leave it untouched was to allow its inherent, ancient biases to persist, structural flaws that might be the root cause of every unbalanced and predatory pact that had ever been written. This revelation split the academy down the middle. Factions formed overnight. One group, led by several senior students who remembered the cost of the Thalmor conflict, argued passionately for immediate, permanent sealing. They believed some knowledge was too dangerous to possess, a fire that would inevitably burn the hand that held it. The other faction, comprised of theorists and historians, saw an unparalleled opportunity to understand the very nature of their world, to potentially cure magic of its inherent corruptions at the source. The debate raged in the halls, a war of ideals fought with quiet, intense words. Elara listened to all of it, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She understood the terror of the sealers, but she also knew that ignorance was not a defense against a power this profound. Burying it would not make it go away. It would only leave its secrets for someone less careful to find. So she made her choice. They would study it, but under conditions of absolute control. She designed a research protocol with multiple, redundant fail-safes. The contract would remain in its magically inert chamber, observed only through scrying mirrors. No direct physical contact would ever be permitted, and a team of 3 senior decipherers would have to agree unanimously before any single diagnostic spell was cast upon it. It was a cage of procedure built around the most dangerous idea in the world. Yet the first contract seemed to have its own ideas. Its mere presence began to warp the local magical environment. Minor enchantments throughout the academy behaved erratically. A light spell flickering through every color of the spectrum, a self-heating teapot suddenly freezing its contents solid. More disturbingly, spoken words began to carry unintended weight. A student's casual promise to finish an essay by morning found them physically unable to sleep until it was done. A joking agreement between friends to share a dessert manifested as a tangible, magical compulsion they had to consciously resist. The contract was not inert. It was radiating its fundamental nature, enforcing the concept of agreement on the world around it, and its influence was growing. These were not random malfunctions, but clues. The phenomena hinted that the contract was not a static object, but an entity in a state of waiting, listening for the right condition, the specific phrase or circumstance that would fulfill its primordial purpose and activate its full, world-shaping power. The first contract's resonance was not a plea, but a call to order. Elara's research into the erratic phenomena pointed to a truth that reshaped history itself. The contract was not a Daedric trick or a mortal invention. Its linguistic and magical architecture bore the unmistakable fingerprints of the Aydra, the original spirits who sacrificed their power to create the mortal world. This was a foundational document, co-authored at the dawn of time, and its full activation required something no single mage could provide. It demanded a unison of mortal and divine will, a conscious choice from both the inheritors of the world and the fated powers who shaped it. This revelation did not stay within the Academy's secure walls. Such a profound shift in the nature of magical law sent ripples through every plane of existence. In the courts of oblivion, Daedric princes who thrived on chaotic bargains and loopholes saw a threat to their very nature. Simultaneously, the distant, fragmented aspects of the Aedra, who rarely intervened directly in mortal affairs, began to stir, their attention drawn to this echo of their original work. Elara found herself at the center of a celestial storm, her every move watched by entities whose motives were as vast and inscrutable as the stars. To navigate this alone would be to become a pawn in their eternal struggles. The decision was too monumental for one person, or even one academy. She needed a council free from the corruption of guild politics and the ambition of kings. She formed a conclave, summoning the most trustworthy minds she knew, a diverse group of master mages, reclusive priests of the Nine, and even a few enlightened monks from the Greybeards. Their sole purpose was to decide the fate of the first contract through collective wisdom. The stakes could not be higher. Their choice would echo through every spell and pact for generations. To activate the contract could potentially stabilize Tamriel's magic, smoothing its inherent volatility and closing the door on predatory clauses forever. But to tamper with the bedrock of reality was to risk the opposite, a magical cataclysm that could plunge the world into a new era of chaos, where no promise could be trusted and no enchantment held firm. The conclave debated for days in the sealed chamber, their voices hushed and intense, as they weighed the terrifying hope of renewal against the profound safety of the known. A soft light began to emanate from the contract behind its protective glass. It was not the erratic flicker of before, but a steady, rhythmic glow, as if a great heart had begun to beat. The condition for its activation was no longer a theory. It was imminent. The chamber's air grew thick with the scent of ozone and old stone, the pressure of their attention, an almost physical weight. The conclave stood encircled by impossible forms, shimmering projections of divine order and chaotic will, their silent demands a war of pure concept in the air. Elara's gaze was locked on the first contract, its rhythmic pulse, now a drumbeat, counting down to an impossible choice. She understood then that this was not a prize to be won, but a fulcrum to be set. Its true purpose was not to empower a victor, but to hold the very scales of creation in balance. To let either side control, it would be to shatter the world into tyranny or anarchy. The only path forward was to complete the Pact's original design, to inscribe a clause that would make it self-regulating, a permanent system of checks and balances woven into the fabric of magic itself. But such an act required a scribe with no personal stake, a will utterly free from any tether that could be pulled or manipulated. Her eyes fell to the amulet at her chest, its gentle pulse a testament to the soul she had fought so hard to save. It was her greatest treasure, and the one thing that made her unfit for this final task. The love that had fueled her entire journey was now the final barrier to its completion. With a resolve that felt like tearing out her own heart, she reached for the amulet. The act was not one of magic, but of pure will. She did not break the enchantment. She released it, severing the bond she had forged with her mentor's soul fragment. A profound silence filled her, a hollowing out of the most cherished part of her being. That emptiness became her focus, her clarity. Placing a hand on the glowing contract, she channeled the united, focused intent of the conclave, weaving the warring energies of the celestial manifestations into the new clause. She did not command the power, she guided it, defining a system where order would temper chaos and chaos would challenge stagnation, a perpetual dance of cosmic balance. The contract flared with a light that was neither warm nor cold, but simply absolute. For a moment, everything was definition, a universe of pure law. Then the light receded, sinking back into the document, which now hummed with a deep, stable, and utterly neutral tone. The divine and Daedric manifestations did not vanish in anger, but faded like honored guests departing a ceremony, their presence no longer needed. The chamber was quiet. Elara stood alone, the empty amulet cold against her skin. Her mentor was safe, whole, and finally free, but the personal connection that had defined her was gone, sacrificed to a greater equilibrium. She had not lost her love, she had translated it into the foundation of the world, her greatest personal cost becoming the cornerstone of a new, more stable age for all magic. Seasons turned, and the Academy's foundations grew stronger than the stone they were built upon. Elara's students, now masters in their own right, fanned out across the provinces. You could find them in the courts of kings, mediating disputes between warring clans whose ancient pacts threatened to spill into open conflict, and in quiet villages, dissolving curses that had plagued families for generations. They became the unseen weavers of a new stability, their work a quiet testament to the idea that understanding a problem was the first step toward mending it. Her mentor was a constant presence, his laughter echoing in the halls where his suffering had once been a silent specter. Though the magical bond between them was gone, a deeper connection had taken its place, forged in shared ordeal and quiet respect. He taught not from scrolls of power, but from the worn pages of hard-won experience, his stories a living curriculum for the wide-eyed novices who hung on his every word. The first contract rested in its chamber, its light now a steady, gentle pulse, like the heartbeat of the world itself. It was no longer a threat or a prize, but a monument. Scholars would visit it, not to unlock its power, but to remember the cost of balance and the profound responsibility that comes with the words we choose to bind ourselves. Elara often stood before it, the hollow space where the amulet had once rested, a permanent reminder of the price of peace. The work was never truly finished, of course. For every contract they peacefully nullified, a new one was drafted in some shadowed corner of the world, its ink fresh with ambition or desperation. But now there was a system in place, a network of knowledge and a generation of mages trained to see the hidden clauses and the real-world consequences. New students arrived each season, their minds full of questions and their hearts full of hope, ready to add their own chapter to the endless story. They were the next keepers of the balance, the next decipherers of fate, ensuring that the power of a binding word would always be met with the wisdom to understand it.